it's Janelle Waz and welcome back to another Star Trek video. You might remember a video I did a while back about whether or not you should skip the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation. After all, the first season of any Star Trek show is often a rough season, and Next Gen's first season is particularly rough.
Pain. Such pain.
Nevertheless, I love Next Gen, and the show grew to be pretty great. Similarly, Star Trek Deep Space Nine started out a little rough, but it too grew into a fantastic show. However, don't skip DS9's first season! You see, unlike Next Gen's first season, where a good part of it was retconned, DS9's first season defines a lot of themes and characters that become important for the rest of the show. And besides that, it's a lot more watchable than Next Gen's first season. Oh, don't get me wrong, it has its rough patches, but there are a lot of great episodes in that first season that are worth watching. So, today's video is a guide to watching DS9's first season. I'm going to go through each episode and say whether it's required viewing, not required but still a good episode, or completely skippable. While I'd still encourage you to go through the entire first season at some point, if you're having a hard time getting into the show, I'm here to help. New object coming out of the wormhole, it's DS9's first season.
Welcome to Deep Space Nine.
Okay, so first things first. Emissary, the 2-hour pilot episode. Do not, I repeat, do not skip this episode. It is required viewing. I know, a lot gets retconned after season 1 of a Star Trek show, let alone after the first episode. But that is not the case for DS9. The whole premise of the show is defined in this very first episode. Commander Sisko coming to DS9 and the baggage he carries after being widowed during the Battle of Wolf 359, his involvement with Bajor, his meeting the Bajoran prophets, in other words, their gods. These will be very important as the show goes on. Not to mention the development of Bajor and the Bajorans after the Cardassian occupation is a major theme in the show. This also applies to Sisko's first officer, Major Kira, a member of the Bajoran militia and former resistance member. Sure, some minor details get retconned as the show goes on. Heck, Dax as a character doesn't even fully develop for quite a while. But most of what's established in this episode is built upon for the rest of the show. You don't want to miss it. Next is past Prologue, and I'm going to call this one required. Sure, the Kon Ma group never gets mentioned again in the show, but this episode introduces some of the political tensions on Bajor, as well as introduces fan-favorite character, Mr. Garrick, the plain, simple tailor.
Plain and simple.
It's also an opportunity to see the Duras sisters once again, who are always a fun watch. Plus, you get to see a great little smackdown Sisko gives Kira.
Go over my head again, and I'll have yours on a platter.
And you know he means it. Is A Man Alone pretty standalone? Yes. Do the events of the episode have a long-term effect on the show? Not really. But nevertheless, I'm going to say this episode is worth your time because it's a good Odo episode. Odo, the station's chief of security and a shapeshifter, is accused of murdering a Bajoran man in a locked holosuite, where the only one who could have entered and exited without being detected would be a shapeshifter. While this is early Odo and some parts of his character were still being worked out, like that voice.
You want to watch the Caronet tournament? She wants to listen to music, so you compromise. You listen to music.
It's still a pretty good crime drama episode and a good look into Odo as a character. Plus, who could forget this great legal analysis?
Killing your own clone is still murder.
I don't think I'd call Babel required viewing, but it's still a pretty decent episode. The entire station is struck by an aphasia virus left over from the Cardassian occupation, and it's up to the crew to figure out a cure before everyone dies. This isn't the last time something left over from the Cardassian occupation would cause havoc on the station, as a similar plot is used in Season 3, in a pretty good episode, by the way. But for the most part, the consequences of this episode aren't long-term. Not required viewing, but not a bad hour of TV either.
Bread, the arrive, seen earlier.
Oh.
Captive Pursuit is pretty skippable. Not that it's a bad episode, and it's a Chief O'Brien episode, so it's got that going for it. But there's nothing that really carries over from this episode. It's mostly just Chief O'Brien helping a hunted down alien escape the station. It's your standard Alien of the Week DS9 episode, which comes up a lot early in the show. Watch it if you want, but totally not required. Now, you would think I would say definitely watch Q-less. After all, it's a Q episode, and Q's a bit of a fan favorite. But this Q episode is definitely skippable. It has some good moments like this.
You hit me. Picard never hit me. I'm not Picard.
But otherwise, it's pretty meh. Q causes some havoc on the station with Picard's ex-girlfriend Vash, and that's it. Skip! I'm not saying Dax is the greatest episode. It can be a little slow at times. But it does expand the Trill as a species, somewhat of a rarity in DS9, and Jadzia Dax, one of the main characters. Jadzia is the host to a symbiont, Dax, and has the memories of its previous hosts. However, she has a warrant out on her for a possible crime of one of the previous hosts, resulting in a hearing on the station. In a local bar, no less. Yeah, you can probably pick up a lot of these details without watching this episode just by watching the rest of the show, but I still recommend watching this episode. It's not the greatest, but it has some decent world building. Now, The Passenger, on the other hand, is completely skippable. It's another Alien of the Week episode, and while the mystery can be intriguing the first time around, it's a very strange episode with some very strange acting. If you want, come back to it later for some hammy acting, but don't feel bad about skipping it altogether.
What kind of fool are you?
My own special variety.
Now, many people may tell you to skip Move Along Home, but you know what? Everyone has to experience the insanity that is Move Along Home. Required.
Alamarine, count to 4. Alamarine, then 3 more. Alamarine, then 3 more.
This episode is often maligned as DS9's worst episode, but to be honest, if you accept it as campy like the original Star Trek series, there are far worse things to watch out there. It's standalone and doesn't affect anything long-term. Just where were the Wadi during the Dominion War exactly? But you just have to experience this episode.
This is not what I signed up for!
If you're coming over from Next Gen, you're probably thinking, a Ferengi episode? Ew, no. But let me assure you, DS9 has perfected the Ferengi episode. The Nagus is required viewing. The Ferengi play, if not a super important role in DS9, then a significant role. This episode has comedy, it's got world building for the Ferengi, and I mean decent world building, and it makes up for every bad Ferengi episode in Next Gen. Plus the scene where Jake Sisko teaches Nog how to read is just so heartwarming. I love it.
It has 3 moons? You got it!
Vortex teases Odo finding out about his origins, but you don't actually find out anything. Skip! I'm going to call Battle Lines required viewing. Yes, there's a lot in Battle Lines that's skippable. The fighting factions on the Prison Moon don't show up again, at least not in the show. But this episode marks the last regular appearance of Bajoran spiritual leader Kai Opaka outside of Visions, and features one of 2 major developments in Major Kira's character in the first season. Here is where Kira starts to turn from a hard-nosed major who fought for Bajoran freedom to someone with deep regrets about what she did during the occupation.
I'm afraid the prophets won't forgive me.
They're just waiting for you to forgive yourself.
If you're having a hard time liking Kira up to this point, this episode softens her up a little bit and adds more dimension to her character. The Storyteller, completely skippable. Other than a mildly amusing B-plot between Jake, Nog, and a Bajoran girl and their hijinks on the station, there's not much here. O'Brien attempts to tell stories to scare away a giant cloud. No, I'm not messing with you. That's the episode. Skip! Progress is a pretty good story and a pretty good Kira episode. A major theme of DS9 Season 1 is Bajor's recovery after the Cardassian occupation, and this episode definitely does that. That being said, is it required viewing? Probably not, just because there aren't a lot of long-term consequences from this episode for the overall story. But like A Man Alone, it's still worth your time. It's a good character-building episode for Kira and the Bajorans as well.
What the hell are you doing?
Saving your life.
If Wishes Were Horses is kind of a goofy episode where everyone's dreams materialize and we see Rumpelstiltskin, emus on the promenade, and the first appearance of Sisko's baseball. Nevertheless, it's pretty weak and a thoroughly skippable episode. Now, I know some people out there don't like Waxana Troy, but I'm not one of them. I love a good Waxana episode, and some of her best episodes are the heartfelt ones. Waxana and some delegates come on board the station, Waxana takes a liking to Odo, and one thing leads to another, and Odo's trapped in the turbo lift with Waxana, which leads to some great scenes in this episode. Is this episode required viewing? Probably not, but it's not a bad episode and might be worth a viewing anyways. Depending on how much you like Waxana, of course.
Ah, there you are, Odo.
Dramatis Persona. It's mutiny on the station. Kira against Sisko. O'Brien against Kira. Dax's head is in the clouds, and Sisko is Avery Brooks.
So, this is how it all ends. You see, unlike you, I understand history.
The crew really hams it up during this episode, but is this episode really necessary? No. It's a chance to see the actors stretch their legs a little and have a little more range outside of their usual characters, but at the end of the day, you can skip this episode. Remember how I said Battle Lines was one of two major developments in Kira's character? Well, Duet is the other, only the entire episode is required viewing. And it's so good, it wound up on my top 10 DS9 episodes list. This is a great episode in multiple ways. Not only does this episode serve to add further dimension to Kira beyond the angry, bitter Major recovering from the occupation, but it really showcases the mastery of writing of the show's writers. The episode deals with some heavy material, namely the atrocities committed by the Cardassians against the Bajorans, but it's all done through two people talking. Most of the episode is a two-man play with nothing graphic being shown, and the episode stays pretty PG. This episode might be a tough watch, but the ending is pure gold, one of the best scenes in all of Star Trek. And now we've reached the season finale, In the Hands of the Prophets. This episode ultimately leads into the Season 2 premiere, so just from that, this episode is required. But beyond that, it does a lot to expand Bajor and the conflicts between the Federation and the Bajorans. It also introduces Vedek Wynn, who would become a major adversary to Sisko as the show progresses. While, in my opinion, the initial dilemma of the episode could have been very easily resolved, this was a very solid season finale for a first season of a Star Trek show. And that's DS9 Season 1. About 6 episodes that are required, plus 1 for Move Along Home. You just have to experience the insanity of that one. 7 episodes to completely skip, and the rest optional, but worth your time. Hopefully this guide will convince you to watch what I consider to be the best Star Trek show.
Good luck, Mr. Sisko.
But now what do you think? Are you interested in watching DS9 now that you have more of a guide? To the DS9 veterans out there, do you agree with my assessment, or are there some episodes that I should have included as required? Or are there episodes that I said were worth your time that simply aren't? Please, leave comments below and discuss. As always, thanks for tuning in to another Star Trek video. If you like what you see, why not give my video a like and subscribe to my channel? Tell your friends! Until next time,
I
really like Deep Space Nine, and I like you.